Jaya Stotra Shishi Mati Stavanga Sabhai Charana Vishwaka Shosha Papa ISKCON, Vibhuti Kavacharya. Save the whole world, Srila Prabhupada. Jai Nitya Vishnupad. Paramahamsa Parivarajakacharya. Ashtottara Shri Maji Vaimishra Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki. Namacharya Sharadas Thakur Ki. Premnizagaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Bhakti Sri Sri Radha Krishna Govardhana Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhana Brajbhumi Shivindavana Ki Navdip Mayapur Nama Ki Pushtam Chetra Jagapuri Nama Ki Gangamai Ki Jamunamai Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Tulasi Maharani Ki Samaveta Bhakti Vindi Ki Jainitai Gopremanandi. All glories to Samuel. All glories to Samuel. All glories to Samuel. All glories, let it be the true Lord, true Rama, all glories, true Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Rishi Uvacha. Iti tasam swashaktinam. Iti tasam swashaktinam. Iti tasam swashaktinam. Satinam asametya sa. Satinam asametya sa. Satinam asametya sa. Iti tasam sashaktinam. Satinam asametya sa. Prasupta loka tantranam. Prasupta loka tantranam. Prasupta loka tantranam. Nishamya gatim Ishvara. Nishamya gatim Ishvara. Nishamya gatim Ishvara. Prasupta loka tantranam. Nishamya gatim Ishvara. Rishiruvacha. Iti tasam sashaktinam. Satinam asametya sa. Prasupta loka tantranam. Nishamya gatim Ishvara. Rishiruvacha. Iti tasam sashaktinam. Satinam asametya sa. Prasupta loka tantranam. Nishamya gatim Ishvara. Rishiruvacha. The Rishi Maitreya said, Iti, thus, tasam, there, swashaktinam, own potency, satinam, so situated, asametya, without combination, sa, he, the Lord, prasupta, suspended. This word prashupta, you probably have heard the word shushupti, which means like a sleep, or the Lord when he's in his Karadakshay Vishnu when he's in a sleeping state. So Prashupta, often you see when this prefix pra was there, Prabhupada would mention this term prakrishta rupena, which I've asked a number of Sanskrit scholars and they don't really seem to know what it means. But Prabhupada would use this to emphasize something, this pra, as a prefix. So it would seem to indicate here that it's a suspended state, but they're like seriously suspended. There's no movement at all. So it's kind of interesting the way this term's come up. Lokatantranam, in the universal creations. Nishamya, hearing. Gatim, progress. Ishvara, the Lord. Translation. The Rishi Maitreya said, let me say it once first and then we'll do that, yeah? The Rishi Maitreya said, the Lord thus heard about the suspension of the progressive creative functions of the universe due to the non-combination of his potencies, such as the Mahatattva. So this also here, this Swashaktinam is referring to the Mahatattva. The Rishi Maitreya said, the Lord thus heard about the suspension of the progressive creative functions of the universe due to the non-combination of his potencies, such as the Mahatattva. Purport. There is nothing wanting in the creation of the Lord. All the potencies are there in the dormant state. But unless they are combined by the will of the Lord, nothing can progress. The suspended progressive work of creation can only be revived by the direction of the Lord. So, excuse me, you may recall from the last chapter that the Devatas were, obviously they're charged with creation, and they were trying to create the universe, but they didn't really have the oomph to do it. They didn't really have the Shakti to do it. So they started to offer prayers to the Lord, and their prayers begin by glorifying the Lord's lotus feet and the benefits of taking shelter of the Lord's lotus feet. And then they talk about who's qualified, who's not qualified to take shelter of the Lord's lotus feet. And then finally, they pray to the Lord for enlightenment and direction, because they're feeling completely unqualified to be able to create the universe. And in fact, without the mercy of the Lord, they are unqualified. And this is actually the mood of a devotee. Very much feels this: without Krishna's mercy, what can I do? And there's a really interesting story in the beginning of the Bhagavatam. You may recall that section in the first canto where Yudhisthira starts to observe inauspicious omens, and he's wondering what's going on, and all sorts of really inauspicious things, and he sort of discusses it with Bhima, and he mentions all these different sort of things. Does it mean this? Does it mean that? And finally, does it mean that Krishna's wound up his pastimes? So he understands what's happening, and then just as he's come to that conclusion, Arjuna returns. And Arjuna, informs him of his greatest fear, yes, that Krishna has actually wound up his pastimes. But it's really interesting there that Arjuna was entrusted with all the ladies from the Yadu dynasty, and he was meant to take them to Vrindavan from memory. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I think it was Vrindavan. But on the way, he was accosted by what appeared to be cowherd men, and he was pulled out his bow and he's trying to fire his astras and things like that, and he couldn't remember them, and they were all ineffective, the ones he could remember. And actually, he was devastated because he was conquered by what appeared to be a much lesser foe. And from that, he concluded that without Krishna present, without Krishna's mercy upon him, what could he do? He was completely hopeless. And so this is the mood of a devotee, is they feel that whenever they don't have the mercy of Krishna, or without the mercy of Krishna, they're unable to achieve anything. what's that? Mukham karati vachalam pangum langai te karim. Yat kripa tamavanda, Sri Guru Dina Panama, Sri Chaitanya Swaram, Paramananda Madhavam. Jayapataka Maharaj often quotes this. So it basically is saying that by the mercy of the Lord, or by the mercy of the spiritual master, or the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, that the lame man is able to climb mountains, that the blind man can see the stars in the night. And so it's just saying that by the mercy of Krishna, everything's possible. But without the mercy of Krishna, nothing is possible. And so this is the mood that David is taking here, is that if we don't have the mercy of Krishna, what can we achieve? And it's also interesting here because we see what's happening is if you're familiar with the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam, the first two, does anyone know the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam? No? Okay, so the first two topics are Shaga and Vishaga. So Shaga means the primary creation. And this is the secondary creation, what's being discussed here, the Vishaga. So the primary creation is done by Krishna. He's the one who it says, Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadi Radhe Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. So he's the cause of all causes. That everything that's created in this universe is coming from Krishna. Same thing he says in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, Aham Savasya Prabhu Mata Savam Pravatite Iti Matva Bhajante Mam Buddha Bhava Samanvataha. He declares to Arjuna, he says that Aham, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. And the wise, Buddha Bhava, the wise, Buddha means intelligence, Bhava, they have an intelligent nature. The wise who perfectly know this, they engage in my service and worship me with all their hearts. So they're understanding that ultimately everything comes from Krishna. All material worlds, all spiritual worlds, all the energies, they come from Krishna. And so he's the one who's ultimately created everything. And we understand, and this process is explained here to some extent, because what we'll see through this section of the third canto is that several places Vidura is asking Maitreya to explain the creation, not just one time, but and each time there's a bit of a different sort of theme, or a bit of a different approach. He wants to understand the creation from different angles of vision. Right now, he's just asking questions in a somewhat introductory way to try to it's very sort of basic philosophy that he's asking here, just to give people, the people who ultimately hear the Bhagavatam, an understanding of the nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it's explained in a very simple way that Krishna, he expands into Balaram, then Balaram expands into Sankarshan. From Sankarshan comes the first Chatavyuha. From that Sankarshan, there's a Maha Sankarshan. From him comes the second Chatavyuha. And then from that Chatavyuha come the Purusha avatars. And the Purusha avatars are the ones who do all the creation. So here the prayers are being offered to Mahavishnu, or Karanadakshayi Vishnu, in the previous chapter. And now he is going to expand himself as Govardhana Vishnu, enter into the universe. And from Govardhana Vishnu, this chapter is actually called Creation of the Universal Form. So from Govardhana Vishnu, what happens is that the universal form, or the Virat Rupa, or the many different ways it's referred to, comes into being. And it's kind of the way it's explained here, especially in the first 10 verses here, you'll see it's describing this Virat Rupa form, or the creation of the Virat Rupa form. So all the non-conglomerated elements, the subtle elements, the gross elements, the 10 senses, the mind, etc. They're all the 23 different elements that they're manifest in a non-conglomerate form. They're not mixed together. And we'll see in the next verse it describes how these elements start to be activated. But the idea is that when they're in their separated forms, that they're not interacting. It's just like anyone who cooks. If you make a cake or something like that, you can have all the different ingredients, but until you mix them, nothing's going to happen. So in the same way here in the universe, and this is described in detail in the beginning of the 5th chapter of the Brahma Samhita also. Of course, the language there is a little bit more difficult to understand than what Prabhupada's explaining here. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he would use very, very sophisticated English, primarily because the people he was very, very educated, but also because of the audience he was addressing, he used language that was suited to them. And so the same idea is explained in the Brahma Samhita about the non-conglomerate elements, and it talks about how when the Lord glances at these non-conglomerate elements, then he injects into the non-conglomerate elements the Kala Shakti, which means the time, the Jiva Shakti, living entities, and the Kriya Shakti, the action, the force of action. So time is what brings all things into motion. Time is what causes things to happen. So by injecting the time Shakti, and this will be discussed in the next verse, it's referred to as Kali, but you'll see that Prabhupada explains in the purport that actually this is talking about Kala, the time Shakti. Yeah? And when the Lord glances at these elements, then what happens is it all starts to stir into motion. And the jiva, with their desire, also enters into this mahatattva, and this then, because of the desire of the jivas, then the creation starts to take place. Because ultimately, the material creation is here for to enable the jivas to fulfill their material desires. Because if the jiva doesn't have the material desire, there's no need for the creation. But because these material desires, the creation actually manifests and takes place. And it's described that when Garbhadaksha Vishnu, he lies down on the Ananta Shesha, the Garbhadak ocean, and then he enters into a mystic slumber, and then from his navel comes this lotus that Brahma takes birth on. And it's interesting that the point of the lotus is actually understood to be the desire of the living entity. And so it's very hard and very sharp, and it pierces through the navel of the Lord. So this is what really stirs of course, the Lord is adding his energies in there to make it all happen. But the thing that really motivates and brings the material creation into life or into being is the desire of the living entity to enjoy the material nature. So without this desire, there would be no material creation. Because in the material world, in the spiritual world, everything is focused around the satisfaction of the Lord. So there's no need for a separate creation. But when the living entity has a separate desire, this cannot exist in the spiritual realm. This separate desire, this desire to be separate from Krishna or to enjoy separate from Krishna, it cannot exist in the spiritual realm. Therefore, there's a separate creation. So in order to fulfill that desire to enjoy separately from the Lord, then the material creation has to take place. And so this is what's being described here. And primarily all these elements, the 23 different elements, they take a form in the form of the universal form of the Lord. So all these different elements are included there, and all the elements of the universe are included there. And we see in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 11th chapter, when Arjuna saw the universal form and he was describing what he was seeing, he saw everything there in one place. He saw himself, he saw all the warriors on the battlefield, he saw all his relatives, he saw Krishna, he saw Balaram, he saw the whole universe. He saw there in one place. So this is the elements coming together in one place. And then it's described how it was kind of like a fetus. This initial manifestation of the universal form was like a fetus, and it rested on the ocean, the Garbhadak ocean, for 1,000 years. So this is like the gestation period. And then after 1,000 years, then the secondary creation really sort of took its shape. And then all these, it took progressive steps, and then the creation started to manifest more and more. So this is actually describing, in the second canto and places like that, it describes more about the primary creation, but this section is describing the secondary creation. And I can't remember the verse exactly, but it's in the I think it's the first verse in the 7th chapter, and it describes Sukadeva Goswami is describing how there are 10 topics in the Bhagavatam. So he talks about Vishaga, Attashaga, Vishaga. Anyhow, the verse escapes me, but he just talks about the secondary creation, the primary creation, the secondary creation, maintenance of living entities, the Poshana. He talks about, and all the different topics. I can't remember the 10 topics, but up to the point of the Ashraya, or the Samabodham, which means Krishna, the Supreme Person of Godhead. And this verse is describing. It's actually mentioned several times throughout the Bhagavatam, and Jiva Goswami himself gives a very elaborate commentary on it. But the point being that Sukadeva Goswami is making is that any Mahapurana, or any sort of proper Purana or full Purana, has these 10 topics, and so the Bhagavatam describes these 10 topics, and this section, this third canto, is discussing a lot about the Vishaga, or the secondary creation. But Jiva Goswami makes the point that we shouldn't try to assign individual topics to individual cantos, because he makes the point that throughout the cantos these different topics are discussed. And you'll see here that in this third canto, first off we talk about the Shaga, the primary creation. Now we're talking about Vishaga, also the Ashraya. We'll see later on when Kapila Deva is discussing with Devahuti, he talks about the ultimate shelter. He talks about the process of devotional service. So you see throughout the cantos that there may be primary topics that are being discussed, but also all the other topics are discussed there. Okay, and it's also an important point that Srila Prabhupada is making here. You see in the verse how it talks about how the Lord heard from the Devatas about the suspension of the progressive creative function of the universe due to a non-combination of his potencies. So Prabhupada's making the point that there's nothing lacking in the creation of the Lord. Like sometimes, materialistic people, or the scientists, for instance, that they'll think that they're able to perfect the creation or make things better by their arrangement. But as Prabhupada's pointing out here, there's nothing lacking. Everything you need to live in this world, to enjoy a happy life in this world, is already there. And there's no need for people to meddle with it or think they can improve it. It's just like a simple example is you look at something like a flower, and how beautiful flowers are, and the beautiful colours, and some of the flowers just got extraordinary colours, or some of the birds, like we've got so many beautiful parrots here in Australia. Like look at the rainbow lorikeet and the colours of that, and then you get an artist and they try to paint it, and you compare the two. The painting doesn't come anywhere near close to the beauty of the bird. So Krishna's creation, everything in Krishna's creation, as it mentions in the Ishopanishad, says Om Purnamadaha Purnamadam Purnamadachate Purnasha Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Vishishtate, that the creation of the Lord is perfect and complete. And even though so many perfect and complete units emanate from him who is the perfect and complete person, he still remains the complete balance. He's not diminished at all by all these elements emanating from him. So this is an important point to understand, especially for us as devotees, that everything is already there in this creation. Everything you need is there. You don't need anything else. And especially to perfect your Krishna consciousness, everything you need is there. To have a happy life in this world, everything you need is there. We just need to remember where it's all come from. And there's this, what's this, the word of Ishavashamidam Sarvam, it mentions also in the Ishopanishad, that this understanding that Isha, he's the master, he's the controller, and everything is coming from him. And this is what the Devatas are praying in their prayers in the previous chapter. They're accepting, they're acknowledging that everything comes from Krishna, and that ultimately everything is there for his pleasure. And Prabhupada would sometimes speak very strongly against material scientists, and he would say sometimes he would say that they're creating so many amazing things, but why do they deny Krishna? This is the main concern, is they deny the existence of God, and they don't give credit to God. Because when they explain the creation, and there's many different theories of creation, sometimes some are more prominent than others, but they can only take their explanation of the creation back so far. But when it gets to the point of where all the elements come from, what's the ultimate source of all the elements, they have no real clarity on that. They can't give us any factual information about where these things come from, and they're not willing to accept that this. Generally speaking, some are, but they're not willing to accept that there's a supreme creator, or that there's a supreme source of everything. And this is the point that's being made here, and this is the point that the Vedic scriptures explain to us, that ultimately everything comes from Krishna. Ishvara Paramakrishna Satchidananda Vigraha Anadi Radhi Govinda Sarvakaranakana. That he has a transcendental body which is full of knowledge and bliss. And he is the source of everything. There's no one greater than him. There's no creator beyond him. He's the one who's created everything. And this is the problem with material science, is they don't accept. They create many amazing things like this microphone. It's quite interesting technology. How it's just the movement of air is creating electrical impulses that go down. In this case, it's wirelessly. They go to the amplifier over there, and through the manipulation of electricity, it's able to amplify the sound. Quite extraordinary that they can do that. But where does the electricity come from? Where's the moving sound particles come? The capacity to move air. Where does all this come from? This is the difference between a devotee and a non-devotee. This devotee understands that all this is coming about by Krishna's arrangement. It's all coming about by his potencies, as I was saying before. He says, Aham Savasya. Savasya means everything. Everything comes from me. All spiritual and material worlds, Krishna is saying, come from Krishna. The devotee accepts that. But not only says, oh yeah, it all comes from Krishna and that's it. No, Krishna says that the intelligent person understands this, worships me with all their heart. So this is the point here that Prabhupada is making, is that it's ultimately, all these energies are already existing, everything is already existing, and it's all coming from Krishna, but nothing can happen, nothing can be stirred into motion. Just like we're talking about this microphone, right? Where does the intelligence for that to make something like this come from? Krishna explains in the 15th chapter. He says, Savasya Chaham Shri Vishnu Mata Smriti Jnanam Aponam Cha. He says that I am the sort, that from me come knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. How? Because I'm seated in the heart. Hridhi Vishnu, he says, I'm seated in the heart of every living entity. And from him, because someone might be making something or trying to come up with a theory or something like that, and they're working on it. Just like I remember the reading many years ago about these Polaroid film, where you can take a photo and it develops, in front of you like magic. When the first time I saw it, it was magic. You don't have to send it off to the chemist to get them to process it and stuff like that. And like, where did this come from? These guys tried, I can't remember how many it was, but literally tens of thousands of different formulas to get it right. But one day they had an inspiration. Oh, let's try this. And they did, and it worked. Where did that inspiration come from? Mata Smriti Jnanam Aponam Cha. It comes from Krishna. He's the Lord in the heart. He's inspiring every living entity. But the materialistic scientist or the materialistic person will think, by my intelligence, see how smart I am. I figured this out. But actually we see this is not the mood of a devotee. Arjuna, he says in the end of the Gita, he says, Tvat prasadat maya chuta. He says, by your mercy, my Lord, now I understand. Now I understand what's going on. Now I understand my position. Now I understand the position of all these other living entities. Now I understand that I should follow your instruction. This is the position of a devotee. Whereas the position of the non-devotee, he wants to claim credit for everything. The devotee wants to give all credit to Krishna. And that's what the Devatas are doing here, is they're giving all credit to Krishna. Then Krishna becomes satisfied with their prayers. He becomes satisfied with their devotional approach. And therefore, he sets the creation into motion. And it's the same for us in the process of bhakti. If we develop the proper mental, because it's just like you can read the Bhagavatam 1,000 times, you can read as many, unlimited times, you can read the Bhagavad Gita unlimited times. That in itself is not going to qualify you to go back home to Godhead. It's not going to enable you to return to the spiritual realm. No, we're fully dependent upon the mercy of Krishna. We're fully dependent on the mercy of the Vaishnavas. Without that mercy, we will not achieve the ultimate destination. So, but the way to achieve that mercy of the Lord, and as mentioned, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, he's explained, Yasha Prasada, Bhagavat Prasada, Yasha Aprasadam Nagati Kutopi. So he says, Nagati, the Gati means to go, or the destination. So Nagati, you won't get the destination. You won't get the supreme destination without receiving the mercy of Krishna. And you can only receive the mercy of Krishna by receiving the mercy of the spiritual master. And we see earlier on in the Gita, in the 4th chapter, Krishna explains to Arjuna how to achieve the mercy of the spiritual master. He said, Tadvidi pradipatena pariprashnena sevya upadekshanti dana skalinas tapadashna. Just try to understand the truth by approaching a bona fide spiritual master, inquire from him submissively, render service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge to you because he has seen the truth. So, by satisfying the self-realized spiritual master through submissive inquiry and service, he becomes pleased, and then he bestows knowledge upon you. And without receiving, there's also another verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita where it says, Brahmanda Brahmanikon Bhagavan Jiva Guru Krishna Prasad Kripa Poi Bhakti Lata Bija. It explains how the jiva is wandering throughout the universe, going up and down through so many different planetary systems and different species of life and things like that. But when one becomes very fortunate, one receives Guru by the mercy of Krishna. And then when one pleases the Guru, one receives Krishna. So it's a very scientific process, and it's whereby one can actually ultimately return to the spiritual realm is by the mercy. We can, and the only way we can achieve that mercy is by pleasing the Guru and by ultimately pleasing Krishna, and that enables us to become qualified and return to the spiritual realm. So it's a wonderful process, and Prabhupada is making this point here, that without the mercy of Krishna, nothing will happen. And just so that the verse I was just explaining from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it explains that, because the mercy of Guru is essential in order to return to the spiritual realm, but without the mercy of Krishna, you can't get the mercy of Guru. So it's a very interesting system. And if we apply ourselves diligently to this system and receive the blessings of the Guru and ultimately receive the blessings of Krishna, this is how we become qualified. You can't force your way. It's just like when you I just went overseas and you stand in line, especially in a place like Singapore, you're kind of hoping that they're not going to. They're very strict there on their immigration policy. So if they pick you up on something, they just won't let you in the country. Some countries are a bit different. I remember one time I flew from Hong Kong to Delhi, and I couldn't get a visa in Hong Kong. They said, "Oh no, you have to get back in Australia." They wouldn't give me a visa, and so I went to Delhi, and I was begging and pleading with the guy at the immigration guy to let me into the country, and it was Janmashtami day. And I said, it's our spiritual master's appearance day tomorrow, please. I just want to go to Vrindavan for one day and be there for Prabhupada's disappearance day. And so I was waiting for quite a few hours actually. It was about 6 or 7 hours. And then the immigration officer came out with my passport. He stamped. He said, "Right, you've got 2 days." No other country in the world you could do that, But in India you can do it. But usually it's you can't force your way in. But India's a bit of a different place, and if you have a valid reason, I'll let you in. But the point being here is that the whole creation is actually going on. Everything is going on by the mercy of Krishna. And as devotees, we need to understand that. And that's why these discussions here in this 3rd canto are quite important. 5th canto and different. And also Prabhupada talks about it in his purport at the end of the 10th chapter of the Gita. how it's important for devotees to understand how Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because in that way you become more and more inspired to want to surrender to Him. Because before we can surrender to the Vrindavan feature or appreciate the Vrindavan feature of Krishna, we need to understand His majesty. Because of this is the level of bhakti we're at. We're at this level called Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, which means following rules and regulations, which means developing this Aishvarya concept of God. And through developing this Aishvarya concept and through following the rules and regulations of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, the heart becomes purified. When the heart becomes purified, then we can actually understand these higher or deeper realizations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I finished that. Any questions at all? Yes, Smita, I'm reading with
Hare Krishna, thank you for the class. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, that verse where Krishna says, I'm within your heart and I dictate your remembrance and forgetfulness. And I was just thinking, is that determined on our desires? Like, is it Krishna going to help us remember something or forget something because we want that? Or is it completely up to Krishna?
Desire is a part of it. Qualifications are part of it. Yeah. It really depends. I mean, definitely desire is a big part of it, but it really depends on the consciousness of a jiva and what their kind of direction is in life, I guess. If, say, for instance, if someone wants to be, absorbed in the material nature, so he'll give you the capacity to remember things about the material nature, but also the capacity to forget about him. But if you want to be, a devotee of Krishna, then he'll empower you to remember him more and more. He'll inspire you to read the shastras, to chant the holy name, to do all these different things. So, largely it's coming from your desire, but there's other factors there as well. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi.